I should have been dead. I said it out loud because otherwise I would have screamed. The ballroom lights were too bright, the champagne too warm, and my wedding dress had turned into a bandage. Of lace, tight and useless, as if it were trying to hold together everything breaking underneath. Laughter burst like soap bubbles across the room. Effortless, pretty, empty. Someone's bracelet chimed against a glass. A violinist slid into the chorus of a love song I used to adore. Perfect timing. I saw them through the floor-to-ceiling windows first, a reflection before the real thing. He dipped her slightly, the way he'd practiced with me, and then Ian kissed Mirae as if the world were not currently aware that his fiancé, me, had just walked back in from the rain. Mirae's hand cupped his cheek like she owned it. My best friend's mouth tilted into a familiar smirk I'd always mistaken for pity. Inside my ribs, something small and devoted collapsed to its knees. I felt it go. Felt the careful timelines I'd drawn with highlighters and planners and 6 months of deposits slide off the table and smash. I did not cry. My throat had already learned not to believe in tears. My skin, though. My skin knew. The air hurt on it. I stepped backward through the side doors and into the downpour, where my veil plastered itself to my neck like seaweed. The marble steps were slick. The sky was a cheap chandelier someone hadn't dusted. If I stood still long enough, I could be an angel fallen straight into a hotel gutter. Not your most flattering light, a voice said. Low, dry, a note of faint amusement that made me think of a match struck in an empty theater. I turned. He shouldn't have been there. I knew his face. Knife clean, unreadable, black hair rain-darkened and combed like he could part the weather with it. The first time I'd seen Daniel Seo, months ago, he'd said exactly 3 polite sentences to me in an office corridor, and somehow rearranged my blood. He was the kind of man people warned you about with a shrug. Everyone had a rumor and none of them matched. You shouldn't be here, I said. My voice sounded like pages stuck together. Neither should you, he replied, and loosened his tie as if the storm deserved formality. But we both make interesting choices. Behind us, the ballroom kept applauding. I pictured the toast. To love, to loyalty, to health, to whatever fantasy keeps a room steady. I imagined the photographer adjusting the camera, closer, closer. Perfect. You knew, didn't you? Daniel's gaze didn't touch my dress. He looked at me the way a man might look at a locked door he intended to open without force. That it would end like this. The rain softened, suddenly. A hush before thunder. Don't, I whispered. He tilted his head, not unkind. Don't what? Make it sound like wisdom. I'm a cautionary tale you tell in turns. You're not a tale. Another flash of lightning lit the brass sign. Riverside Grand. My reflection flickered next to his. You're a choice. Something caved. The lightning took too long to become thunder. I reached for the stone railing and missed. The night tipped. The wet edge found me. And then, cold. Not rain, not wind. Cold, like metal. Cold like the clean interior of a surgical instrument. The world sheared down the middle, and the seam glowed, a pale thread pulled from a black cloth. I felt my body sigh out of itself. The ballroom shrank to a snow globe, and the street to a postcard. For a heartbeat I was nowhere and everywhere, every disaster I'd ever survived dangling from a mobile above me, turning lazily. I caught a glimpse of Daniel, the only still thing in the tilt of the night, his mouth forming my name. I tried to answer, a syllable, or a prayer. The light snapped. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at a water stain on my ceiling that looked like an upside-down rabbit. The air smelled like old soy sauce and instant noodles. The world had a cheap fluorescent halo. My heart rabbit-kicked my ribs. No, I said to the ceiling. No. My couch was still the second-hand gray one I'd dragged up 3 flights of stairs alone. The coffee table wore a ring from a mug I'd meant to move for a month. And from the kitchen counter, a soft chirrup. Nabby? My voice trembled. Nabby, is that you? My cat. Ginger, unapologetic, historically allergic to affection unless you were stirring. Tuna. Leapt delicately from the counter to the table, tail up like a flag. She blinked at me. Nabby, you died, I whispered. Don't take this personally. She yawned, which I chose to interpret as, try again with snacks. I sat up too fast. The room wobbled. The cheap wall clock above the TV said 7:14 p.m. My phone, on the cushion beside me, vibrated with a cheery notification from a food delivery app I hadn't used in years. Years. My phone was also 4 generations old. My hands started to shake. Okay, I said, because when the floor falls out, I narrate. Okay, Elena. You are not wearing a wedding dress, you are wearing pajamas with dubious strawberries. Good. Great. On the small dining table, a styrofoam bowl of instant noodles waited, steam curling like an indecisive ghost. I had not eaten noodles in, well, long enough to pretend I was above them. And then I saw it. At first I thought the wet eyelashes were back on my eyes. Threads. Hair-thin, light-catching filaments laced the air, faint as spider silk. One stretched between my chest and Nabby's collar. Another trailed from my shoulder through the wall into my neighbor's apartment like a lazy kite string. A few drifted along the ceiling, crossing and uncrossing, humming softly at the edge of hearing, as if the building were a harp. I stood, stomach flipping. The thread to Nabby pulsed a warm, mellow gold, like tea through sunlight. The one to my neighbor, who sang off-key at midnight and apologized with brownies, was a polite silver. Further out, through the thin wall facing the street, dozens, hundreds of threads. Braided, knotted, unraveled, a city's worth of connections, glittering faintly. I reached out, because I am an idiot in every universe, and pinched the gold thread between forefinger and thumb. It felt like the instant before a kiss. The charged nothing, then like heat. Nabby on the table blinked solemnly, then head-butted my wrist. Okay, I breathed. Oh, wow. You're real. I turned slowly. It was everywhere. People were everywhere, neighbors, strangers, couples on the sidewalk below, and the air recorded them, mapping the invisible architecture that had always mocked me by not existing. My skin knew what to do with this. It lifted, thrilled and terrified, listening to a symphony only I could hear. I dropped my hand. The threads blurred, faded slightly, like a polite curtain lowering. I could still see them if I focused. I could still feel them, thrumming at a distance. What are you? I asked the room, which continued to be a room. And when did I become the world's saddest fates cosplayer? Nabby sneezed. The kettle clacked off in the kitchen, though I hadn't turned it on. Steam ghosted the little window. Outside, cars passed, their headlights 2 brief coins. I checked the date on my phone with a nausea I had not earned yet, 8 years earlier than the wedding. 8. My brain threw confetti, and then told me to sit down before I cracked a hip. 8 years before the aisle. Before the venue. Before the deposits. Before I bought a white dress, I convinced myself I deserved. Before the kiss. My tongue pressed against the word like it had a bruise. My shame had always been efficient, so it sent the next thought quickly, you get to do it again. Not the wedding. The life. And then, a second thought, quieter, not mine and very much mine, or you get to refuse. My knees wobbled. I sat. I laughed once. A small broken sound that managed to be both a sob and a dare. My palms were damp. My pulse skittered like a bad drummer. Fine, I said to the upside-down rabbit on the ceiling. New plan? The threads at the edges of my vision twanged, almost approving. I stood and drifted to the mirror on the hallway closet door like a person visiting a crime scene she's trying to forgive. My face looked younger, rounder, less professionally exhausted. I touched the soft shock of my cheek. In my eyes, something had sharpened, the look people get right after they stop lying to themselves. Hi, I told the girl in the mirror. We are going to make better mistakes. A memory pulsed. The ballroom, a man in the rain. A voice like the flick of a match. You knew, didn't you? Daniel Seo. The name pulled a thin silver thread taut in the air, humming in a key I didn't know I knew. I didn't touch it. My fingertips tingled anyway. I looked down at the styrofoam bowl, now tragically swollen, and laughed for real. Fine. We'll start with noodles and boundaries. The first bite burned my tongue. I welcomed it. Pain proved I was located. My doorbell rang. I froze. In the hush that followed, Every thread in the apartment trembled. One, thicker than the rest, colorless at first, began to darken, the way ink seeps into water. It slithered from somewhere far beyond my building, through the wall, under the doorframe, and coiled to a stop on the other side of my lock. Black. It wasn't a color so much as an appetite. Nabi's ears tipped toward the door. My heart remembered how to sprint. I set the noodles down carefully, as if a loud sound would make the thread bite. The hallway outside was quiet, except for the lazy hum of the fluorescent bulb, the one that always buzzed like it was anxious about its job. I must have imagined the cold that slid over my skin then, the metallic, instrument-clean cold that had split the world. The doorbell rang again, polite as a tap on a coffin. The black thread tightened. And I, a woman in strawberry pajamas who should have been dead, reached for the chain. Morning tasted like old toothpaste and new rules. I dressed like a civilian, jeans, hoodie, clean face, and told myself not to touch any suspicious metaphors hanging in the air. The city outside my apartment yawed itself awake, buses coughing, scooters whining. A man on the corner consulting a coffee like it had wronged him personally. Above it all, threads. Not as bright as last night, but there, hair-thin luminous lines unfurling from everyone like tide marks. I stepped onto the sidewalk, and the world tuned itself. A couple passed me, hands almost touching. A soft rose-gold cord stitched between their wrists, elastic, sweet. When her phone buzzed and she answered Mom, the thread thinned, then rebounded when he squeezed her shoulder without looking. The kindness had weight. I felt it like a warm penny pressed into my palm. Two office workers speed-walked through a crosswalk. Their conversation pure complaint. The thread between them was a taut steel wire with frayed edges, competitive camaraderie, the kind that cuts until it holds. A cyclist swore at a taxi. Between them hissed a static thread that flashed and vanished, a disposable spark. I could turn the vision down by blinking slow, like dimming a lamp. I could also turn it up, which, predictably, I did. Inside the bakery on my block, the barista's laughter laced the air with confetti, threads, light and bright, offered to every customer like sugar packets. When he glanced at the baker in the back, a different line gathered, a steady amber rope. Thickened by rituals, extra frosting on bad days, a shared playlist on good ones. I wanted to applaud. "Ma'am?" the barista said, and I realized I'd been staring at the ceiling like a tourist in a cathedral. "Croissant?" "Two," I said, because I intended to do very brave things later, and bravery runs on butter. I carried the paper bag outside and texted Mirae before I could chicken out. "Me, coffee?" "Mirae, of course, babe. You okay? You were quiet last night." "Me, I'll explain." "Noon?" Our spot. Our spot was the kind of cafe where the ferns had names, and the chairs looked like they had opinions. I got there early and sat where the light hit the window just right. Threads webbed the room like rain you could hear with your eyes. A student's blue thread trembled between her and a textbook, a toddler's glitter. Thread yo-yoed from his fist to a pastry case. Two women at the corner table bickered softly with a thread like elastic, stretched thin and snapping. Back, a 30-year friendship bouncing gently against its bruises. Mirae arrived on a gust of citrus perfume and kisses. She was beautiful, obviously. She had the kind of face that made cameras behave. Her coat shrugged off her shoulders like it had been trained. "Elle," she said, and took my hands across the table like a scene partner. "You're pale. Are you sick?" "Don't be sick. If you die, who will tell me when my bangs are a mistake?" "Your bangs are always a mistake," I said, because ritual is comfort. And she laughed the way she always had, light, contagious, a line thrown across any awkwardness like a streamer. I made myself look, not at her mouth or her eyes, which lied elegantly when they needed to, but at the air between us. A gold thread ran from Mirae's chest. It should have been pointed at me. Best friend, emergency contact, first call when she hated address. It should have been ours. Instead, it angled away, slanting down the street, away from the cafe toward. It wasn't the building, or the city, it was a person. A person who was not here. A person whose laugh I could still identify in a crowded room, and whose toothbrush had once lived, smugly next to mine. Ian. The thread toward him was gold, yes, but not the warm wedding band kind. This was brighter, edged with a white sheen like hollow foil, the sort of shine that implies something is limited edition. It glittered every time Mirae's phone lit up, even when she didn't check it. When she reached for her latte, the thread tugged and then steadied, like a leash on a well-trained dog. My stomach dipped, and then, shockingly, didn't break. I watched the thread for another second, as if proof could be improved by staring, and then I looked back at my friend. "You okay?" she asked again, gentler. "You texted me before noon." That's a cry for help. I realized I've been asleep, I said. "I'm done napping." She squeezed my fingers. "I knew you'd wake up," she said, and I wondered if she heard the truth in her own voice, the glittering gravity of the thread pulsing like a secret heartbeat. "You've always been dramatic, but you're also, what did Professor Huang call you? Stubbornly resilient." "Resilience is my toxic trait," I said. The joke sat there, looking dignified, while inside me a bouncer showed 3 unruly emotions: the exit. Mirae updated me on her life, the project she'd landed, the way her mother had started a K-drama, and forgotten to cook for 2 days. A new serum that made skin look like a moral choice. I nodded, smiling where I was supposed to, and catalogued what I could. I did not ask about Ian. I did not mention the metallic cold that had split my world. I did not reach for the gold thread to see if it would burn. When we hugged goodbye, a thin, familiar line trailed briefly between us, silver white, old and soft, patched in places. Friendship never lies entirely. Even betrayals use its language. I held her tightly enough to make both threads hum. She stepped back, eyes shiny like she might cry, and then laughed it off, because that was our favorite magic trick. "Text me tonight," she said, and breezed out, gold flashing like a coin flipped and caught. I went to see Ian because truth is a phobia best treated with exposure. He met me outside his office building, tie loosened, smile arranged at a nice, affordable sincerity. The thread from him to me was not kind. If the line to Mirae was hollow foil gold, then the one from Ian to me was a sun-bleached yellow rope with places rubbed raw to gray. It sagged, then jerked, then sagged again, like a tether someone kept tripping over. He said, pulling me into a hug, and the line twitched. "You look, wow. Did you cut your hair?" "I trimmed my expectations," I said lightly. Hair was a side effect. He chuckled, relieved when I made the first joke. That had always been our dynamic. I carried the humor like groceries. He held the door and called it help. He asked if I'd eaten, if I'd slept, if I was still using that ridiculous calendar with stickers. He handed me concern the way people hand out flyers, smiling, not checking if I wanted one. When I brushed his sleeve accidentally, the thread throbbed a dull off-tempo beat. Guilt. Maybe habit. Definitely not devotion. His phone buzzed. He didn't look, but the gold line arcing toward away, from me, toward Mirae, flickered as if it had been name-checked. "New ringtone?" I asked. He colored. "Spam calls," he said, and the bleached rope between us frayed another half-inch. I don't know why I expected to break. Maybe because last time, I had. Maybe because grief had trained me to lie down on command. Instead, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't forgiveness. It was identification, as if the threads were labels, and I could finally read the jar I'd been swallowing from, not love. Do not mix with hope. We said goodbye with promises to talk soon, the kind you make to prove you can say them. I turned away before my manners could write me into a sequel. By late afternoon the city's threads were a low, steady hum, a beehive I'd learned not to fear. My feet took me to a neighborhood that smelled like sesame oil and rosemary, where laundry lines made flags between brick buildings, and a small shop sold herbs and advice. The bell above the door chimed like a toy piano. Every shelf was a museum of jars and paper packets labeled in careful handwriting. At the counter sat Halmione, the grandmother the entire block claimed as theirs. She wore a cardigan the color of thunderstorms and a mouth like a tidy scar. "Ah," she said, not looking up from the newspaper. "The girl with the loud silence." "That's me," I said, and took off my hoodie because her shop was always warm. Threads here moved slower, like they respected the space. One looped from the ceiling down to a wooden tiger charm and back again, as if the charm were breathing. She flipped a page. You brought your fear inside like wet shoes. Leave it at the door next time, it ruins the floorboards. I'm learning to hang it on a hook, I said. Hooks are for coats, fears need fire. She set the paper aside and peered at me with the focus of a seamstress threading a needle. Your line is different. My line? She made a small circling motion at the air by my chest. It used to be obedient. Now it does not bow. Is that good? She shrugged. Bow to no one but your own kitchen gods. Her eyes softened. You brought me croissants? I blinked. I did, actually. I lifted the paper bag. 2. For your blood sugar and my bribe. Bribes are just compliments with butter. She tore a croissant in half and handed me a piece. Eat. You look like a promise someone forgot to keep. I sat on the stool by the counter and chewed while the shop hummed. When she spoke again, her voice lost its mischief. People think threads mean fate, she said, tapping the wooden counter. They think lines are rails, and rails lead to only one destination. Nonsense. Threads are stubborn, yes, but stubborn things can be unpicked and rewoven. If you are not afraid of blood and tears, I repeated, making a face. Sounds festive. She snorted. Messy is another word for honest. Her gaze flicked to the door, then back. If you want a different pattern, child, you must be willing to pull. And if the whole sweater unravels, then you knit a better one. She set her hand, light as tissue, over mine. Do not confuse comfort for love, or habit for destiny. The threads around her seemed to lean closer, listening to their elder. I left with tea I didn't need and a spine that felt slightly taller. The evening wind smelled like frying garlic and possibility. Beneath the streetlights, the city's web shimmered. A million private utilities laid bare. I walked home slowly, practicing my new trick. Not touching, just witnessing. At my door, the memory of last night's black thread twitched like a shadow at the corner of a story. I did not open that page. Not yet. Inside, Nabby judged me for being late, and forgave me for opening a new can. I leaned against the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug that steamed like a good omen, and said the thing out loud so the apartment could hear it and hold me to it. This time I told the upside-down rabbit on the ceiling. I'm not playing the victim. The threads along the walls thrummed, faint and sure, like a chorus backing me up. I'll be the one pulling. Daniel chose a cafe with glass walls like confessionals and chairs that made you sit up straight. He was already there when I arrived, all immaculate angles and unbothered weather. The city's threads draped around him like he'd negotiated a ceasefire with gravity. Ms. Han, he said, standing politely as if my name were a visiting dignitary. You're right on time. I hate being predictable, I said, and sat anyway. The chair immediately taught my spine manners. He watched me with that stillness I'd associated with sculpture and predators. No excess motion, no fidget. Even his breath seemed edited. His tie was a shade of black I had never seen in nature, obsidian melted into velvet. So, I said, pretending this was about coffee and not the new law of my universe. Why me? Why not you? He tipped his head at the barista. Americano? Latte, I said, because milk felt like armor. He nodded, ordered, and returned to being a well-dressed warning label. The threads in the cafe bent subtly around him, as if currents had learned a more efficient route. Between us, a slender filament quivered, silver, not bright like the bakery boy's confetti, not steady like the baker's amber. This was something alive. It pulsed, slow as a deep-sea creature, then stilled, then pulsed again. I folded my hands to keep them from reaching out like an idiot, and plucking it. You don't call people by their first names? I call people by what they earn, he said. Or what they survive. Wow, I said. A line that could either be a compliment or a deposition. A corner of his mouth considered smiling, and rejected the idea for lack of merit. You've had a week. Let's not undersell, I said. Try Apocalypse Sampler. The server arrived with 2 cups, and a saucer of sugar like diamonds, that had agreed to be edible. Daniel waited until the server left to speak again. I heard you're looking for a shift, he said. In perspective. Perspective is free, I said. You can get it at the park with a pretzel. Then we both know it's not what I'm offering. I swallowed a mouthful of latte that went down like silk in regret. Ah. There it is. The pitch? He didn't lean forward. He didn't have to. His attention did it for him. You want to stop bleeding out on other people's stories, he said. You want to write your own. I can help. Generous, I said brightly. What's your hourly rate? Will you also throw in a free tote bag if I sign today? Elena, he said, my name clean in his mouth, and the silver thread between us thrummed, a plucked wire in a quiet room. Last time you misread me. The word last loosened a trapdoor in my chest. Last time. Flashback is a rude editor. 1 second I was in a cafe with a latte, the next, I was in a boardroom, where the HVAC believed in permafrost and ambition had a cologne. It was 2 weeks before my first and last promotion party. I was the youngest lead on a brittle project, the sort of assignment designed to make or end a career with equal ease. I'd pulled 12-hour days and 10-hour nights, and stapled my self-worth to the slide deck. We were 3 signatures from launch when someone with a voice like Final Cut asked to see me. Daniel, back then, didn't look at me. He looked through the work in my hands the way a jeweler looks at a ring that claims to be diamond. Curious, not impressed, patient for the truth. He said 10 sentences. 5 were questions. 2 were knives wrapped as cloth napkins. 1 was, this timeline isn't sustainable, and you know it. I can do it, I had said, already at the cliff, already running. I've done it. You've sprinted on adrenaline, he said. Adrenaline is a liar that sends flowers. I hated him on the spot. He pushed, gently, and the whole schedule fell like a broken bead curtain. The launch was delayed. 2 senior managers blamed the nearest convenient surface, me, and the promotion evaporated with a delicate pop. That night, I drank wine that tasted like melted cherry lip balm, and told myself I'd remember the lesson: never let a man who wears boredom like a suit touch your life. Only months later, after I'd stopped chewing the inside of my cheek down to paperwork, did a rumor drift my way. There were violations in our vendor chain no one had wanted to see. Legal had been a sleeping bear. Daniel had fed it coffee. The delay had saved us from a bigger fire. I heard it, marked it as trivia, and filed it under things I refused to credit him for. Now, in the glass cafe, the past folded itself back into the present like a map reluctantly obeying. You think I ruined your career, he said mildly, as if observing the weather. I think you enjoy pulling rugs, I said, and watching the furniture learn humility on the way down. I prefer floors to be sound, he said. People bleed less. The silver thread licked at the air between us. Not romantic. Not friendly. Something like potential wired to a live outlet. I took another sip to have somewhere to put my mouth. Say we are not enemies, I said. Say I misread the entire genre of you. Why would you help me now? Because instruction is cheaper than rescue, he said. And you have an instinct for both. He glanced, just once, at my hands. At the thumbnail I dug into my palm without noticing. Also, I have a problem. Your goals and my problems shake hands. There it is again, I said. The pitch. Call it a trade, he said. You want to retrieve what's yours, and stop them from doing it again. I want a certain house of cards to fall in a way that doesn't crush the children playing under the table. Poetic, I said. And vague. Specificity is for contracts, he said. Curiosity is for first meetings. Is that what this is? I asked. A first meeting? Because the last time I checked we had at least 3 tense silences on file. He allowed himself a small private smile, like a banker miscounting on purpose. Elena. Do you want the short version? Always. I'm offering you resources, he said. Information, introductions, insulation. In return, you will work with me, temporarily, to shift a few levers. Some of those levers happen to be attached to people you already intend to disappoint. Disappoint, I repeated. As in, not give them what they want? As in, he said, not give them what they think you owe. A thread to my left. between two strangers comparing calendars, twanged with the relief of a sudden plan. I exhaled, surprised by how much I wanted the word insulation. Did he mean shields? Did he mean a room I could stand in without apologizing? Did he mean I see you bleeding and I brought towels? You should know, I said, leveling my cup at him, that I am currently allergic to saviors. Even ones with good tailoring. I'm not auditioning for sainthood, he said. It doesn't suit me. It doesn't actually, I said, picturing him with a halo and getting hives. You look more like a very expensive sin. He took that in as if it had been offered on a tasting spoon. And you, he said, look like someone who has stopped pretending she doesn't want the knife if it cuts her free. The silver thread flashed bright enough to make the edge of my vision spark. I swallowed. If I agree, and I haven't, what's the first step? You'll come by the building tomorrow, he said. I'll put you in a room with a whiteboard, and 3 people who think whiteboards are religion. We'll begin with maps, relationships, incentives, access points. He finished his Americano. And you'll bring your sight. I pretended he meant ordinary things. My sight? He looked out at the street, where pedestrians refused to be choreographed, then back at me. I'm not in the habit of telling people their secrets, he said softly. I prefer to convince them to use them. The latte went heavy in my stomach. The threads in the cafe held their breath. You, how could you possibly? He stood, smooth as a verdict. A wise woman once told me that fate is a messy seam, he said. The ones who survive learn to stitch. He placed a card on the table. No title, no company, just a number, and a name that didn't need either. Think before you say yes, he added, not unkind. Think harder before you say no. He left a tip, a shadow, and the slight impression of a climate-controlled storm. The bell on the cafe door chimed once, polite as a bow. I sat there for 3 breaths, then 5, then 12, because numbers make good flotation devices. The latte cooled. The silver thread between us didn't vanish, it receded, like a tide marking the line it planned to reach later. Outside, the city's web hummed. A toddler wailed with the despair of a cancelled universe, and was soothed by a mother's thread that glowed like a porch light. A man laughed into his phone with a thread to someone waiting at an airport gate. Life kept threading itself on purpose. I stared at Daniel's card until the simple typography looked like a dare. In the glass reflection, my face had that sharpened look again, the one that had unsettled me in the hallway mirror. A person who had stopped lying to herself looked suspicious. People expect women to be soft containers. I felt like a blade wrapped in a sweater. Fine, I told the card, the latte, the ceiling, the tiny god of brave chairs. Fine. The worst part wasn't that a man I'd labeled an enemy had offered me his hand. The worst part was the truth that slid into place like a key in a lock. What terrified me most was how much I wanted to say yes. I invited Mirae over because friendship, like a haunted house, is best toured in daylight. I scrubbed the apartment until it smelled like lemon justice, and hid the dramatic evidence of my new religion. Sticky notes that said things like observe, don't rescue, and stop writing apology emails in your head, inside a cookbook I never used. Mirae arrived with tulips and opinions. Elena, you need color, she said, sweeping in like a brand ambassador for spring. Your walls are committing quiet crimes. My walls are innocent, I said. They've never even jaywalked. She kissed the air near my cheek and did a slow, elegant 360, as if casting me in a better life. The gold thread from her chest angled out the window and down the street, glittering toward a person who was not here. I didn't look at it directly. I'd learned that was my tell. I brought snacks, I said, holding up a tray of sliced pears and cheese like a shield. I googled non-threatening charcuterie. Baby, she said, fond. Charcuterie is a threat only to people who fear joy. We settled on the rug with our plates, knees touching. This was our most dangerous posture, the one where honesty liked to pretend it might show up uninvited. How's work? She asked lightly. Like herding emails, I said. She sighed. We're in a pitch cycle. The producer makes me want to file a complaint with the Ministry of Vibes. She plucked at the tulips, frowned as if the flowers had disappointed her by being mortal. Also, I'm seeing someone. I hummed. A neutral syllable, diplomatic and edible. It's early, she said quickly, eyes on me. The way you look at a dog before you drop it off at a farm. Nothing serious. Of course, I said, and popped a grape. The thread to Ian flashed like a lighter. I'm happy for you. And I was. Just not in the shape she expected. She talked. I listened with a net. Every word, I weighed. Every glance, I filed. Where she would once have found me pliant, agreeable, complicit with our old choreography, she found me buoyant. I asked real questions. I did not feed her my throat for comfort. When she fished for validation, I gave her curiosity instead. You're different, she said finally, narrowed eyes softening. In a good way, like. You remember you're funny. I'm hilarious, I agreed. I've been repressing it as a public service. She laughed, bright and contagious. And for a breath the silver white. Friendship thread between us warmed, as if remembering its job. She touched my hand. The gold thread toward Ian trembled like a coin rolling to the edge of a table. I have to go, she said, glancing at her phone and failing to look guilty. Brunch with my aunt. She thinks I need more iron and less mascara. Take the pears, I said. They go with any sermon. When the door closed, I leaned my forehead against it and exhaled. The urge to cry arrived on schedule and found the venue booked. I had other plans. Ian did romance like a recipe from a lifestyle blog. Pretty, imprecise, impossible to hate out loud. He showed up at my office with a paper bag and a grin that had charmed doormen, baristas, and 3 of my ex-landlords. Lunch, he announced, unveiling a box of sushi arranged like a personality test. From your favorite place. He'd gotten the order right. He'd always gotten orders right. He had a gift for surfaces, the right wine, the right joke, the right apology. The thread from him to me, sun-bleached, frayed, hung between us like a clothesline that had seen too many seasons. When his phone buzzed in his pocket, the hollow foil gold to Mirae lit as if someone had struck it with a match. Spam? I asked pleasantly. Probably, he said, then softened. I missed you. The old script pried at my mouth. I missed you too. I fed it a rice cracker and let it choke. I've been busy, I said. Trying a new hobby. Yeah? He perked up. Running? Pottery? CrossFit? You don't seem like a CrossFit person, which means you'd be amazing at it. Boundaries? I said. He laughed, unsure if I just made a joke. That a class? Self-paced, I said. The grading is brutal. We ate in the break room while my coworkers pretended they had spreadsheets to marry. Ian told a story about a client who'd confused an NDA with a dietary restriction. He reached for my hand across the table, and the frayed rope between us twitched, hopeful out of habit. I let him touch my fingers. I did not offer my palm. The small win was petty and perfect. Later, when I returned to my desk, my shoulders felt like they belonged to someone who'd stopped volunteering for emotional manual labor. Wins accumulated like loose change. I ignored a text I didn't owe. I laughed at a memory that used to make me curl into a comma. I said no without writing a preface. When an old colleague tried to loop me into a crisis I hadn't created, I replied with a single sentence and 0 exclamation points. Somewhere, a choir of former versions of me stopped mid-hymn, puzzled and proud. At night, I made lists of things I wasn't responsible for. The list was rude and liberating. The city's threads hummed around me like a new appliance you decide you can trust. The party was one of those rooftop deals with fairy lights and shoes that regret themselves. Mirae waved me over from a cluster of people who all had perfect shoulders. She looked like expensive daylight. Ian was already there, tie undone, confidence calibrated to approachable. He said, dipping to kiss my cheek, and the air around us flickered with the polite electricity of witnessed affection. His hand found the small of my back, easy as a habit. The bleached rope to me tugged. The gold to Mirae flashed, then steadied, pulled taut by her laugh across the circle. I took a drink from a stranger who told me he collected mid-century lamps for fun. The skyline posed like it knew it was a postcard. Threads crisscrossed the night, bright laughter braiding with new flirtations, old resentments tying, slipknots, A shy boy's silver thread stretching toward a girl with navy eyeliner and stubborn hope. Ian leaned down while no one was watching. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low. "About us." There it was. The soft pressure of a story he preferred. He angled me slightly away from the group, like a magician setting up the reveal. "We've been off," he said. "I know that. But I want to fix it. I can do better. You deserve a better speech?" I offered, smiling to keep him calm. The frayed rope between us strained, as if it could become something else if we threatened it with enough adjectives. "I mean it," he said quickly. "I love." The words snapped against my skin like a rubber band. The gold thread to Mirae glared, too bright to pretend we were in the dark. Behind him, her laugh rang out, and the thread leapt, answering a bell only they could hear. I watched his mouth shape the lie, beautiful and familiar as a favorite mistake. And then I watched myself not make it. "No, you don't," I said gently. He blinked. What? You don't," I repeated, not unkind. "You love the part where someone believes you. It's not the same." His face did a tiny shuffle through confusion, offense, the rehearsal of woundedness. The rope between us went slack, not dramatically, just truthfully. The skyline got sharper. "Who put ideas in your head?" he asked, a softness with teeth. "I did," I said. Finally. He reached for me like he used to, reassure, reset, rewind. He dipped his head, as if the old kiss could summon the old world. I laughed. It came out bright and clean, a ring of sound the night didn't know what to do with. A couple nearby turned, Mirae's eyes cut to us, the party's threads vibrated like a gossip hive. "In my last life," I said, and the words felt right in my mouth, "I cried here." Confusion deepened. "Elena. In this one?" I tipped my glass in a toast to the city, to the rooftop, to the girl I had been. "I laugh." He froze, arms suspended in the air like a habit that finally met a mirror. The gold thread to Mirae snapped him back, subtle, decisive. He straightened, swallowed, and stepped away as if he'd always intended to retrieve a drink. Mirae approached, concern arranged like an accessory. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice soft enough to pretend she didn't know which way her shine pointed. "Perfect," I said, and meant it in a brand new dialect. The wind tugged at the fairy lights. The music changed like a door opening. Somewhere in the crowd, out of sight, a silver thread thrummed once, alive, patient, as if a storm with good manners had checked the guest list and found my name. Daniel drove like he negotiated, precisely, as if the lanes were clauses and he refused to breach a single one. The city slid past in reflected ribbons, neon signs licking the car windows, streetlights stitching the night into polite squares. I'd told myself not to get in the sedan. Then I got in the sedan. Character growth is not a straight line, it's a spiral with better posture. "Seatbelt," he said, not glancing over. "That's your opening line? Not nice to see you, not you look like minor revenge? Compliments are for dessert. Safety first." "Wow," I said, clicking the belt. My heart. "Be still." His mouth entertained a smile and filed it for later. "Hungry?" "For answers," I said. "Because coffee is bravado and bravery makes you theatrical." "Those two," he said, and took a right. He brought me to a cafe I'd never noticed even though I'd walked this block 100 times. It was tucked behind a bookstore that sold postcards of cities you couldn't find on maps. Inside, the cafe's lights were warm enough to let lies melt at the edges. An elderly couple shared a cherry tart with the dedication of surgeons. The barista moved with the reverence of a monk who'd been told espresso was a sacrament. We claimed a corner table. The silver thread between us was already there, coiled quietly like a well-trained animal at my feet. I tried not to stare at it the way you try not to step on a sleeping cat. "So," I said, when our cups landed, his Americano, my latte, our new liturgy. "We're in a secret cafe. You promised a whiteboard church tomorrow. Tonight is prelude? Think of it as sterilizing. The instruments," he said. Such a sexy metaphor. I'm swooning. "You're stalling," he said, amused. "Do you always joke when you're afraid? Do you always diagnose when you should flirt?" Only when flirting would be unwise, he said, and took a measured sip that somehow read as an escalation. The silver thread hummed in a frequency I felt in my throat. Fine, I said, leaning back. I'll go first. I saw you at the end of an experiment in poor life choices. And then, I didn't die. I woke up 8 years earlier with this. I gestured at the air. Fine, light-catching filaments flickered into friendlier focus around us. Braiding, loosening, insisting. I can see how people are tied, to me, to each other. Sometimes the threads glow like a warm kitchen. Sometimes they look like fishing wire that cut the hand that cast it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even blink too loud. He simply listened with the kind of attention that turns the thing you're saying into a shape you didn't know it had. And you knew, I said. Or at least suspected. I knew you were looking at the world with more inputs than your neighbors, he said. I suspected you'd begun to trust it. Began, I corrected. Trust is expensive. Then consider this a discount. His gaze flicked to the couple dividing the cherry tart. Then back. Last time, when we met in that boardroom, you thought I was there to cut your tether. You were, I said. You did. He set down his cup carefully, like he was putting a word back in its box. I was there to cut the rope that was going to hang you. Memory unspooled. The brittle timeline, the vendors, the rumor of violations I'd refused to credit him for. The way the launch had groaned and collapsed, not because I was small but because the scaffold had been built from bad wood and cheerful denial. I had called him an arsonist for walking me out of a burning house. I didn't ask to be saved, I said softly, not sure if the sentence was a defense or a confession. No, he said. You asked to be believed. I failed you there. The admission landed between us like a drawer sliding shut. I blinked. Is this an apology? I asked, trying to keep the joke from shielding me. It's a record correction, he said. And a regret. I looked at his hands, calm, capable, not wringing themselves like mine always had. I remembered the way he'd said my name in the rain, not a claim, not an order. A label he was willing to hold with careful fingers. Why me? I asked, quieter. You could hire anyone with a decent LinkedIn and a clean moral hazard rating. You have sight, he said simply. And you have the kind of stubborn that outlasts weather. Most people want to be taken care of. You want to be dangerous in a way that keeps other people alive. I snorted, and the latte almost redecorated the table. That is the most backhanded compliment I've ever loved. He didn't laugh, his eyes warmed instead. There's something else. Of course there was. In the other timeline, he said. The phrase made the room lean in. I didn't find you in the rain. I was late. The black car that shouldn't have stopped did. The driver who shouldn't have looked away did. The hospital did its job until it didn't. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The silver thread between us tightened, as if once, long ago and soon, it had been too late to be of use. I hated you, I heard myself say. It sounded like a weather report. I thought you took something from me and left. You needed someone to blame, he said. You chose the man in the suit. It was a good story. I fit the costume. Do you always talk like this? I asked. Because humor is a lifeline, and I've learned to throw it to myself. Like you're narrating a heist through philosophy quotes. Only on Tuesdays, he said deadpan. And when something matters. Does this matter? His gaze steadied. To me. The barista turned up the music, a jazz piano that knew how to flirt with the minor keys. Outside, the bookstore dimmed its windows like closing eyelids. The cafe felt like the inside of an exhale. I keep asking if I misread you, I said. Maybe the question is smaller. Maybe I misread myself. How so? I thought hating you kept me safe, I admitted. It was efficient. You were a symbol. Symbols are clean, people are messy. Messy, he said, is another word for honest. Hermione said something like that. She is a reliable oracle, he said. Even when she is ridiculous. You know her? Everyone knows her, he said. She has a ledger on the block. We all owe her small debts and large cookies. I laughed, an actual laugh, not the brittle kind, and watched something unclench in his shoulders at the sound. The silver thread warmed. I didn't touch it. "Tell me the part you left out," I said. "You said there's a problem. A house of cards. Children under the table. Tomorrow," he said, and lifted a hand as if warding off my impatience with a polite palm. "Tonight, I didn't bring tools, just context." "And why tell me any of this now?" "Because trust is a muscle," he said. "It doesn't grow on deadlines." We finished our cups like promises, slow, deliberate, leaving enough at the bottom to prove we could stop. He paid, I let him. Because feminism allows strategic generosity. Outside, the night had softened to that hour when even the most extroverted city remembers it as mortal. He opened the passenger door and waited without looking impatient. Another dangerous skill. As he drove, the streets unspooled toward the river. We didn't talk. Some silences are repairs, not ruins. The silver thread rested against my knee, loyal as a shadow. At a red light, he said, "I was wrong about you, last time." "How?" "I thought you needed to be protected from your kindness," he said. "You needed to be introduced to your power. Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No," he said. And for the first time his voice frayed a little. "They rarely are." He stopped at my building and didn't put the car in park, as if the night needed momentum to keep from second-guessing itself. The porch light above my stoop buzzed like it belonged to a poem about ordinary mercy. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said. "Whiteboard church," I said. "I'll bring incense." "Bring your eyes," he said softly. "I'll bring the room." I reached for the door handle, then hesitated, then gave the hesitation a job. "Daniel." He looked at me like my name had weight he didn't mind carrying. "In my last life," I said, "you were the villain in my head. And now? Now you're complicated," I said. "And possibly the only adult in a very unserious room." "High praise," he murmured. I smiled. "An unarmored thing. Don't get used to it." "Too late," he said, and the smallest smile finally made it to his mouth, like a boat arriving exactly on time. I stepped out into the hush and closed the door with a decisive click. The sedan glided away, polite as a promise kept. On the stoop, the city's threads gathered like a shawl around my shoulders. For once, I didn't analyze them. I stood under the buzzing porch light and let the warmth creep up my arms, ordinary and extravagant. Maybe I'd been hating the wrong person. Maybe I'd been hating the part of me that kept choosing not to see. Either way, the conclusion slid into place without drama. I laughed to myself, quiet, a secret I was ready to share, and felt his gaze from the memory of the car, as if he were still there, looking too carefully and trying not to. We built the trap on a whiteboard and a napkin, which is to say, we took it seriously. At Daniel's office, glass, quiet, the hum of money being polite, we mapped behaviors. Like subway lines, where Ian's flattery connected to opportunities. Where Mirae's charm opened doors and locked them behind her, where my old instincts had obediently laid down and become floor. Daniel drew clean arrows. I added messy notes. A junior analyst named Rhea listened like a court stenographer, and occasionally asked a question that made the truth flinch. "Visibility first," Daniel said, tapping the corner of the board. "No ambushes. You bring light. Let them choose to be seen." "And if they prefer darkness?" I asked. "Then the light shows us where to sweep." We decided on a company dinner that wasn't technically mine or his. A neutral event with enough witnesses to keep everyone well behaved, and enough wine to nudge them toward honesty. A project celebration at a restaurant that believed in chandeliers and understatement. Mirae would be there, haloed by a new promotion rumor. Ian would be there, sleeves rolled to forearms like he invented hard work. I would be there, dressed like relief. "Last chance to rethink," Daniel said in the car that night. He drove the way he always did precisely, but this time my pulse didn't try to race him. "I've done enough rethinking for 3 lives," I said. "Tonight, I practice seeing." He nodded, satisfied. The city slid past in elegant, distracted ribbons. The restaurant smelled like butter and decisions. Clusters of colleagues bloomed around tight tables. Glasses clinked, head tilts performed. Laughter rehearsed to sound accidental. Threads shone everywhere, friendly silver, transactional beige, the bright candy cane twist of a fresh crush nobody had named yet. I tuned the vision down and up like a dimmer, until the room settled into a legible hum. There they were. Mirae entered laughing, all soft gold and camera-friendly concern. The thread from her chest stretched taut toward the bar, where Ian was telling a joke he'd bought wholesale. His line to her flashed hollow foil bright, alive with appetite. The frayed rope from him to me sagged like laundry in rain. Between the two of them the gold braided, looping, tightening, forming an elegant double strand that glowed every time their eyes did that quick private jump across the room. I'd imagined this moment a dozen ways. In most of them, my heart staged a protest, and my face did damage control. In this one, I watched the braid finish itself like a magician's knot and felt alignment. The way a puzzle piece feels when it finally agrees with its neighbors. "Showtime," I murmured. Daniel's hand brushed the small of my back and did not linger. "Light," he reminded, and moved away to float at the edge of things like a well-dressed conscience. I spent the first course being gracious like it was a sport. I complimented. I deflected. I asked questions that didn't mortify me to hear. When I laughed, it was because something was actually funny. The colleagues around us relaxed, threads warming. People are brave with sincerity if you let them wade in slowly. Then I did what we'd planned. I stood with my glass and rang my knife against it. A little bell you can't ignore. 2 minutes, I said, smiling. I promise this is not a hostage situation. I just want to thank the people who taught me how to be better at my job, and somehow also better at saying no without writing a memoir about it. Laughter, a good kind, rolled across the table. I caught Daniel's micro-approval from the far end, a nod like a seal of quality control. I learned to see who shows up before the spotlight, I continued. I learned to ask where praise is coming from, and what it wants in return, and I learned that some partnerships look like teamwork but feel like a leash. Heads tilted. A few threads quivered, curious. I kept my voice easy, my face unarmed. "So cheers," I said, lifting my glass. To the kind of success that doesn't require someone else's humiliation. To the kind of loyalty that doesn't need hiding places. To the kind of love that doesn't ask for secrecy to survive. The braid between Mirae and Ian flashed like a camera going off. Their bodies did a small, involuntary flinch toward each other. The type you deny even when the footage exists. A murmur skated the table's surface, nothing ugly, just the sound of a room updating its files. Mirae's smile sharpened by a millimeter. "Beautiful speech," she said. "Very therapeutic." "Therapy is cheaper than litigation," I said, to general relief. The tension laughed with us, thinking itself dismissed. Then I stepped aside and let the light do its work. It didn't take long. The second course was halfway to edible when a junior designer, a sweet man with a heroic relationship to deadlines, leaned toward Ian and said, "Hey, those numbers you sent me? The ones from Mirae's deck? Should I integrate or wait for approval?" The table hushed itself. In the air, the gold braid between Mirae and Ian twisted like it heard its name. "Which numbers?" Mirae asked, casual in the way a cat is casual standing in the doorway of a room she owns. "The user retention ones," he said, good-natured and doomed. "The ones you said not to share yet?" Ian laughed too loudly. "Different numbers," he said quickly. "You're mixing things up." The designer said, blinking. He had the most honest thread to his work I'd ever seen. Sturdy oak brown. Oak does not bend by accident. "My bad." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The light did it for me. People notice everything they're not supposed to when you give them permission. I watched as eyes skimmed, as memory pulled receipts from drawers, as small frowns appeared and were denied. Threads all around us trembled, then reattached, a room reweaving itself around a fact that no one wanted to own. The braid between Mirae and Ian tightened until it looked like a tourniquet. Mirae's hand found Ian's wrist under the table. The gold thread flashed so bright it made spots in my vision. "You're being weird," she whispered to him, but it was stage whisper, which is to say, an announcement. I laughed. I didn't mean to. The sound broke free bright and clean, a bell rung on purpose. Heads turned. My laughter didn't hurt, it healed something that had been stuck in my throat since a lifetime ago. "Well," I said, setting my glass down. "Finally, Mirae's attention rotated toward me like a turret turning with dignity. What does that mean? That the wait is over, I said. You've both been very patient with your own storyline. Congratulations on the reveal. Ian's eyes did the inventory. What do I admit? What do I deny? What do I weaponize? He chose the old toy. You're being paranoid, he said, tone even, like he was reading instructions to the room. And cruel. Paranoid, I said thoughtfully. Such a pretty word for, you notice something I preferred you not notice. You're humiliating yourself, he added then, perhaps remembering the script requires a tender line. I care about you. I'm worried. Daniel set his fork down with the kind of calm that makes other people fix their posture. No one here is being humiliated, he said, voice level. But we should all be careful about where we place words like cruel and care. They have weight. The room shifted subtly toward him, the way a boat corrects course when someone competent touches the wheel. The silver thread between us hummed at my back like a spine backing me up. Mirae's face softened into performance, all empathy and elegant bewilderment. She said, hand reaching out in a tableau so perfect I wanted to applaud. I'm worried about you too. The gold braid to Ian pulsed at the exact moment her lip trembled. People saw it. Not the thread itself, of course, but the way truth has a way of lighting faces from an unflattering angle. I'm not, I said, and my voice surprised me by being gentle. Worried, I mean. I know where I stand now. It's a good place. The air is better. Ian pushed his chair back a fraction, the prelude to either a confession or an exit. He went with a tack. You've been different, he said, as if diagnosing a glitch. Ever since you started talking to him? His chin flicked toward Daniel like the word him had thorns. Cause and effect, I said. Fascinating field. Mr. Seo, Mirae said, turning the stage lights full on him. This is highly unprofessional. Whatever you're doing. What I'm doing, Daniel said, is eating my dinner and encouraging adults to speak plainly. You're manipulating her. He did not look at Mirae, he looked at me, eyes steady, requesting my consent to be defended. I nodded. Almost imperceptible. He turned back to the table. She doesn't require a puppeteer, he said. She requires a room where the lights are on. Silence settled like snow. Soft. Unavoidable. Then Ria, the analyst with court stenographer ears, said mildly, I think the numbers question is fair to clarify. Tomorrow, in daylight, with access logs. That will save us all from guessing. God bless smart women who like sunlight. The table exhaled. The room, which had been holding its breath like a teenager in a family photo, remembered how lungs work. Someone asked for dessert menus with the urgency of a peace treaty. Threads, reattached. Not all to the same places. Mirae's eyes met mine across a centerpiece of hydrangeas that looked bored. For a half second, the elegant mask slipped. Under it, annoyance, then calculation, then something almost like respect. You're cruel, she said softly. For me alone. No, I said. I'm awake. Ian stood, muttered something about air. The gold braid snapped at the end, like a leash tugged too hard. He didn't look at me as he passed. He didn't need to. We'd already said our last lines. Daniel didn't touch me. He didn't have to. The silver thread between us settled like a hand at the small of my back, steady, unhurried. I lifted my glass, not to toast, not to gloat, but to mark the moment, where a story took a new turn, and refused to apologize for the view. You thought you'd win again, I said, not loud. Just clear enough for the room's memory. But this isn't that story anymore. Morning arrived like a soft apology. The city wore its weekend face, quieter, kinder, as if it had remembered that people needed to be people without witnesses. I carried a paper bag of sesame buns down the block to Halmioni's shop, because victory tastes better when an elder blesses it with tea. The bell above the door chimed its toy piano notes. The shelves were the same crowded altars to ordinary magic. The air smelled like ginger and promises. Halmione sat behind the counter with a crossword, pencils sharpened to a moral point. Late, she said, without looking up. Your buns will get cold. I brought enough for your suspicious neighbors, I said, setting the bag down. And for the deities in the spice jars. She peeked into the bag, approved the ratio of pastry to contrition, and motioned me onto the stool. Her eyes cut to my chest, the way a seamstress checks how cloth falls. Threads lifted in my periphery. Faint, curious, well-behaved. "Well?" she asked. "Did you set the table and let the mice confess to the cheese?" I turned on the lights, and everyone remembered their faces, I said. "It was cleaner than I expected." "Clean is another word for finished," she said. "Not always the same as right, but I will take it." She tore a bun, steam ribboning out, and handed me half. "Eat. Victory needs salt." We ate in a quiet that felt like a long exhale. When I told her the short version, the speech, the numbers, the braid of gold that everyone pretended not to notice, she listened as if I were reading a recipe for a soup she already knew by heart. "You look taller," she said when I ran out of words. "I'm the same height." "Inside," she said, as if that settled it. Then, softer, "Your thread shines by itself now." Something in my chest went very still, then warm. "Is that good?" "Shining threads attract moths and saints," she said dryly. "But yes. It means you stopped begging other lines to tell you what you are." "I thought I wanted justice," I said. "Turns out I wanted oxygen." "Oxygen makes people honest," she said. "Just don't set the whole kitchen on fire to boil one egg." She tapped my wrist, a blessing disguised as scolding. "No more living by revenge, child. Revenge is leftovers. Cold, too salty, bad for the heart." I laughed. It landed in my own ears without brittleness for the first time. "I'm done cooking for ghosts," I said. "I want new recipes." "Good." She folded the pastry bag with an origami precision that could make a general cry. "Go to the park. Walk in circles. Let your feet catch up to your decisions." "That's therapy." "Therapy is just expensive walking with a witness," she said. "Go. Before the handsome one arrives to pretend he is only passing by." I sputtered. "Which handsome one?" She rolled her eyes. "The one who looks like he irons his conscience." "Go." The park had decided to host a festival of small joys. Children discovering kites were negotiations. An elderly Tai Chi group moving like a rumor of wind. A jazz trio practicing under a maple that had seen worse and better. I sat on a bench flaking green paint and watched the city's web shimmer at a humane volume. Threads moved without me. Lovers braided their late morning laughter in rose gold. A runner's silver ribbon chased her breath and caught it. A dog tugged his blue thread toward pigeons with the faith of a prophet. None of it was mine to fix or file. People were patterning themselves, and I had the privilege of being a passerby. The smile that found me didn't taste like victory. It tasted like sunlight on a windowsill no one had claimed. I let it sit on my face without interrogation. "Miss Han," said a voice that had learned to be careful with sharp things. "Are you accepting company that pretends to be accidental?" I didn't turn right away. I watched a kite decide between the sky and its owner, then choose loyalty. "Depends," I said. "Is the company bringing coffee or just superior posture?" "Both," Daniel said, lowering onto the bench with a cup that smelled like decisions I'd actually made. He handed it over without flourish. His suit looked like it had read the room and decided to be less intimidating. The threads around him did their usual subtle deference, but today I noticed something new. His own line, silver, yes, but warm at the edges, loosened near me, like a collar unbuttoned. "You survived the debrief?" I asked. "Rhea ate 3 muffins, which means we're safe," he said. "Access logs are being gathered. Daylight, as requested." "Good," I said, sipping. "How's your conscience? Properly ironed?" "I let it wrinkle on weekends," he said. "It adds character." We sat in companionable not speaking. The silver thread between us rested at our feet like a patient animal. Being near him didn't feel like standing at attention anymore. It felt like standing on a dock, solid, with room for weather. "You were right," I said eventually. "Instruction is cheaper than rescue." "I had a good student," he said. "I had a good—" The word perched on my tongue, preening. I let it fly anyway. "Teacher." For a man whose face knew how to be a courtroom, his eyes gave away too much when he was pleased. They warmed at the edges, crinkled in a way that suggested laughter had keys to private doors. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't make a speech. He watched a kid lose a shoe in triumphant slow motion and said lightly, "If I say what I'm thinking, I will ruin this." "Try me," I said. "Dangerous with oxygen." He considered, then chose a smaller truth that could grow. "I am glad," he said, "that you are not living by reaction anymore." "Me too," I said. "Turns out, I like being the person who moves first." "That was always you," he said. "You just outsourced the permission." "Never again," I said, and my smile didn't splinter. A breeze tried to tangle my hair. I let it. He glanced at me with the carefulness of someone who has learned not to startle wild things, then risked it. "Elena," he said, testing the intimacy like temperature. "About us. I am capable of patience. I am also capable of clarity. I've noticed," I said. "I won't define your life for you," he went on, precise even now. "But I would like to be invited back to the parts I've earned." The silver thread answered him for me, a low, pleased hum. I took another sip of coffee to keep from grinning like an amateur. "I could pencil you in for not ruining things," I said. "It's a competitive slot." "I'll send references," he said. "Family." "Brave," I said, laughing, and watched the jazz trio find a chord that felt like an agreement. He stared at the path as if the asphalt might offer counsel, then tried again, more human. "What I mean is, I'd like to take you to dinner and not bring a whiteboard." "That's a bold strategy," I said. "How will we solve anything without bullet points?" "We could try conversation," he said. "And irresponsibly good bread." "I'm listening." He shifted, finally looking at me head on. "The way you look at weather you hope will break your way." "So," he said, something like mischief daring to live at the corner of his mouth. "Does this make me your happy ending?" I snorted. "Don't flatter yourself." Then, because the air had learned not to punish honesty, I let the rest arrive and sit between us where both of us could see it. "But maybe." He didn't cheer. He didn't pounce. He smiled like a man who had accepted a mission from a reliable oracle, and was grateful for the map. "I can work with maybe," he said. "Good," I said. "I can work with us." We stood when the jazz ended, the kind of standing that doesn't mean leaving, just moving forward. The city combed its fingers through the late light. Threads shimmered everywhere. Strangers weaving ordinary holiness, old griefs loosening their knots, new lines sketching themselves gently into being. As we walked, our silver thread didn't yank or command. It kept pace, unhurried, a line we both held without pulling. People brushed past with their own bright entanglements, their small destinies and larger detours. None of it was mine to fix. Some of it, if I was lucky, would be mine to love. At the corner he reached for the crosswalk button and didn't press it. Just rested his finger there like a promise you make by not rushing. I bumped his shoulder with mine. "One more thing," I said. "Yes?" "Next time," I told him, "bring dessert to go. Halmione likes bribes with butter." "Consider it done," he said. "I prefer blessings that crumb." The light changed. We crossed. The evening opened like a hand, and for once I didn't check the palm. For lines, I wrote my own, with a laugh that finally sounded like home.